Welcome, Ramanan. This is going to be a special CTU Smartcast recording that we're going to do. The reason why we wanted to do this special recording is that we wanted to talk about some of the questions that we've heard in person when we are doing Smartcast recordings from prospective clients, from people who just hear about Choose to Think. The questions that we're going to cover today are primarily going to be around future relevance and how do we practice future relevance at Choose to Think. This is almost as somebody said, I want to see whether you guys actually do what you tell us to do, right? So that is going to be the theme of this smartcast. First question, just to set the context, what is future relevance?
So, if I'm just taking a historical lens here, when we started Choose to Think, we were not using the phrase future relevance. So, our trajectories until that point had always involved knowledge, curiosity, experimentation. And I think for a long time, like other people around us, we often asked, is what I'm going to do going to be relevant in a few years' time? Maybe the time frame in some conversations was 2 years, sometimes it was 5 years. Sometimes it was even as much as 10 years. I think during the course of Choose to Think, in the early work we did, we helped some companies with their innovation programs that led us to thinking deeply about culture and how that is born. We applied our own experiences of being in some of these environments. All the things that we synthesized from our reading of books and listening to interesting people. So we realized that partly what we were helping ourselves and the world do was this phrase called future relevance, and there was no real framework to it. So we are assembling it. So what you're listening to us talk about today is a glimpse at that work in progress. So to understand future relevance, you need to understand who are the villains that we are grappling with at this point in time. One is that I think everyone listening to us will agree that the world is changing shape all the time, and nothing better than the last couple of years to tell us that the shape of the world is very different. So every time you look out of the window, there is some change in the air. It is, and there are trends like digitization. There is trends like remote working. There is a trend what we call as the rise of the empowered employee. More people have the ability to fashion their choices in the way they want it to. And so all these things are, this is not the world that previous generations lived in and worked in. So that is very clear. The second is that,
So let me interrupt you there, Ramanan. So I think the interesting part there is also the fact that things were always changing. We, because of our reading or whatever, we could see that coming. We always keep saying the future is already here, it is just unevenly distributed. Because we knew that the future was there, we knew that it's a matter of time before you're going to get subsumed by that future. I think over the
correct.
last few years, the pace at which things have changed has increased manifold.
Yeah. So William Gibson, who made the quote that you just spoke about, said this quote many years ago. But now I think we are actually seeing it on a day-to-day basis, that uneven distribution. And the nature of relevance itself has got reframed. Earlier, people were on that ladder, that escalator, that conveyor belt. The whole game was about making it to retirement, making it to the so-called corner office. But today, people have completely redefined relevance differently. People are living much longer, they have longer career spans. Should they choose to use that to their advantage? Some people take breaks in the middle and don't seem to suffer too much in their career. Some people go off and volunteer for some time and then come back. So everyone's idea of relevance is very different. There is a lot more choice now, but there is a lot more uncertainty. And that's the next villain along with the shape shifting world. So eventually, what people did earlier, because it was a conveyor belt of sorts, because it was a treadmill, was that your first goal was to get onto that treadmill and then just hang on. And so the relevance agenda was set to other people, whether it is your boss, whether it is your organization leadership and planning to take care of your agenda. Now it looks like we have to own our agenda. A lot of these things we've lived through. So I'm really curious to know whether you agree with all these kinds of villains.
In fact, I would add not a caveat but a corollary, right? So the way you spoke, it seemed like it is meant for individuals. But the surprising thing over the last decade or so has been that companies have also started thinking like these individuals, right? Earlier, it was very easy if you were in a brick and mortar of a space. The most important thing for a hotel or a restaurant was the place, right? Now with things like cloud kitchens and all, that is not true anymore. All those principles of success that companies had learned, most of them have probably turned upside down. Things have been reframed. So just like how for individuals there was this set pattern, set template that you get onto this treadmill and then do this for the next 30 years, and yeah, you have a corner office, or then you retire. There was a similar template, similar pattern for organizations as well, right? And now that has also changed. So future relevance is as much for organizations and companies as it is for individuals. And we've seen some of these great legacy brands become completely irrelevant, right? And I think that is what has been interesting for me over the last 6-7 years, to see how what we started off as thinking about future relevance from an individual standpoint seems to be more and more relevant to both individuals and organizations. So
Yeah,
that's my comment on that.
a very simple way to do this is to look at the number of people who are quote unquote doing their own thing, right?
Correct.
So about even a decade ago, you would, or 2 decades ago, you would be you would be considered a maverick if you stepped off the line even a little bit. It could be women taking breaks, it could be men taking breaks, and like I did between the job that I last had at Choose to Think. And there is a lot more of these maverick-like behavior which has got mainstreamed now. So we are no longer surprised by a classmate deciding to take some time off, start something new. We are no longer surprised by a family member who's exploring new ideas for some time. And so the social, something has clearly changed in all of this. And so going back to your first question, what is future relevance? I think let's answer it this way. Let's ask, what is future relevance, or this conversation about future relevance, trying to answer? And I think in my mind, there are three questions. One is that because things are shifting shapes, there is so much uncertainty. We need to identify what will be valuable in the future, and that keeps the half life of value is now shorter and shorter, and there is this uneven distribution of information. Finding out what is going to be valuable for yourselves, for your team. It doesn't matter if it's an individual conversation or for a team within a larger organization, the site within a larger organization, the organization itself. Finding out what is valuable is something we need to do to stay relevant. The second thing is, once you've identified these destinations, these little goals, these milestones that keep changing, how do you acquire that value? It could be through practice, it could be through knowledge, it could be through networks, it could be through reflection. How do you actually get that capability to deliver that value? And then finally, we realize that there is a perception aspect to it. How do you showcase the fact that you are indeed valuable at these kinds of things? So I think to make it very concrete for our listeners and viewers, let's take our smartcasts. A year ago, we did not have anything called CTQ smartcasts. And we've been hearing about podcasts, and we didn't want to be yet another podcast. But what we realized was the value that something like a smartcast brings in. And so I'll let you take up the story of what we did to uplevel ourselves to be able to deliver this kind of value and the perception side of the smartcast.
Yeah, yeah. So when we started with Smartcast, it was with a lot of trepidation, right? We were not sure whether A, we are cut out for video. Video was not our default medium. B, there were so many podcasts. What extra value will we add to it? To the whole universe of podcasts, right? So that was the trepidation with which we started. But then we realized that just having these conversations with people that we knew, examples of practicing some element of future relevance that we saw, was a great way of bringing their story to others. And then slowly we realized that, yeah, we also had a point of view. It was not just about we asking a question and just letting the guests take all the talk time, so to say. So we realized that they were also in it for actually having a conversation. talking very tactically here in terms of how the smartcast evolved. But I think that is how we actually made these small experiments. We tried out different things, we tried out different formats, how to show the video and all these things, and got feedback. Kept getting feedback from both the guests as well as the listeners. I think one interesting thing that we have done across all experiments is some of our colleagues at CTQ, like consumers, who will take a very unbiased view and give us a very objective opinion on what sucks and what does not. So we had that blunt discussion around how to make these things better. And I think now we've got to the point where we are talking to different kinds of people. There are leaders, there are writers, there are people who would not fall under the traditional category of leaders and CXOs, but have done something really good and have reimagined themselves and their place in their world. And we've tried to draw those lessons. So I think that is what we've done with Smartcast. And I think if you look at take a meta view of this is the kind of stuff that we've done throughout our history of Choose to Think, right? If we look at how we started, I still remember when we were sitting in your house and we were trying to draw that Ikigai diagram where we were looking at what are we good at, what is the world going to pay us for, and trying to form that intersection. The kind of things that came out then were what you mentioned, right? Knowledge, learning, engagement, making things simpler for others to understand. But that was again going back to what Clayton Christensen says, that don't start with a fair sketch of the future that you want to build. Just actually start with a pencil sketch, because things are going to change. There's going to be some Brownian motion involved, and then you may have to make some random movements. But largely the sketch is going to remain in that ballpark, right? So that's how we started. We did various experiments. Initially, it was all about just delivering services. We tried some product ideas. Again, these were small bets. We did something called as Periscope, which was about these brand managers and marketing agencies use some assets that they can use across brands. Then we did some quizzing products. We did Simple Interest, Quiz League. We tried something called a Historic, which then became Iconic India. We tried to do a bunch of things. We treated every customer engagement also as a way for rapid shipping and iteration, right? There's so many experiments that we tried out at these places where again our clients were also very encouraging and happy to be part of this co-creation, where they saw that these are the kind of things that we'll get to know only once we try. And I think some of these things were being tried for the first time, so there was no history, no precedence to go by. So those are the kind of small bets that we placed. And again, it was going back to this idea that don't go with one prediction. Don't try to predict a future, because that is very dangerous. Look at possibilities instead of one prediction, and try to plan for futures rather than one future. So those are the kind of things that we ended up doing. And now I think over a period of time, we have now evolved into having this point of view on future relevance, and the compounding habits that we talk about again started off as an internal experiment.
Correct.
People actually asked us, can we join your internal compound, right? When we started posting about it on Twitter. But yeah, those are the kind of things that we have done. And any specific thing that stands out for you in the last 6-7 years that we tried and we did, which was an example of this, and both something which was not subscribing to the Future Relevance Manifesto that we now have?
Actually, before that, I wanted to mention one aspect, which is that you mentioned how we've got these different guests on our Smartcast, wide variety of them. Also, you mentioned the fact that some of the people we worked in, especially in the early days, just were very happy to work with us, co-create, try out new things. And so they had that future relevance mindset now
Right.
looking back. And similarly, all the people that we've invited on the Smartcast, some people we've known for a long time, some people have just, we've written to them, they've looked at what we do and have been very happy to come on. Before I answer the question of the present, I actually want to say that to be able to do this, we actually had been all the activities that we had invested or supposedly wasted time on in the preceding years had all come to that point where this became possible. So it's like
Correct.
writing your first book. It's the first book is a summation of everything that you've had in your lifetime up to that point, and it really plays a big role as an input. Partly it was fortune that some of these people got associated with it, or when we asked we got a good response, but a lot of it was that groundwork which we had been unwittingly doing ourselves. That I think is very, we shouldn't underrate it at all,
Right.
because all those investments have paid off in these ways. People were a lot more tolerant with us, a lot more ready to partner, and it's almost like building your own taste over time, right? So all that kind of knowledge over time helped us do these kinds of things which we now call future relevance. So that is something I wanted to call out, because that is something we need to continue to do.
Right.
uh, we often talk about the role of present relevance versus future relevance. So present relevance for companies, for individuals, comes from whatever they're doing right now, and they're so successful at it that they forget to disrupt themselves. And that's where the future relevance aspect needs to be deliberately brought in. When we started Choose to Think, there was no present relevance for us. We were discovering that, or trying to create that survival stakes before we could think of future relevance. But it still was 50-50. We did both in parallel. So that was a big shift. So coming back to your question, we did a lot of things that sounded like really weird experiments. I think one of the weirdest experiments we tried, I think, was something called as quizzing for parties, or
Right.
quizzing for companies to celebrate certain occasions. We knew it was a kind of a strange idea. We actually got people to pay. That was the more surprising part for a lot of people who when they heard of this. But the idea there was really to go beyond just thinking of it as one single point offering, but to think of what is it that these people want from an occasion like this, which they have invited us to do a quiz around the person who is the on in whose honor the birthday is. And that actually led us to some corporate assignments. Like you said, individuals and teams, it's the same thing. We did it for teams, where it was an occasion for the team to celebrate 5 years of existence, all the stories that had developed along the way, those night outs. And that in turn led to our whole idea of storification for as part of culture. Really, you do not know how these dots are going to get connected. And so even these weird sort of things, even though we are no longer do party quizzing, we did a handful of them. We found ourselves in the middle of this network of these interesting people. And party quizzing, by the way, was suggested by partly suggested by someone else. It was not something that we invented from scratch. So I
Just
think
to qualify there, party quizzing is not a quiz on Harry Potter for kids. That is not what we did in party quizzing. We actually created a quiz on the person whose birthday it was or whose anniversary it was. So it was a way of celebrating that person, which, as you mentioned, Ramanan, later we use that knowledge to think about how to storify values and storify culture and bring the human side of leaders to teams. That is what we ended up using, the knowledge that we gained
correct.
from those experiments. But yeah, party quizzing, I think we still have the domain name? I think we should have.
I think we do. And I remember that one place we did this at was for Persistent, where its then CEO, Dr. Anand Deshpande, he wanted to do something memorable. He wanted to get people speaking about this. Was 25 years of Persistent, and he had invited a lot of former Persistent employees, I being one of them. In anyone else would have just said, let's do a dinner, let's get everyone. There will be some few awkward speeches, and then you just wait for the food service to begin. But Anand, and he said, I really want people sharing authentic stories, but I know that just putting a mic in front of them is not going to work. So he came to us saying, can you do a quiz around it? And then we further deepened the idea, because by then we knew about party quizzing. And it was a very memorable occasion. A lot of these very interesting stories. I knew some of them through folklore, but this became a part for me, a way for me to dig into the history of their first project. And it led to some very heartwarming on the spot memories that came out and told you what is special about Persistent as an organization. And so all these little experiments, this willingness to try out a few things, plus of course people who gave you that space to try out these things uh, have really been aspects to our future relevance, which we now recognize and are now trying to make sure we don't leave it to chance.
In fact, I'll go one step further there. I still remember this anecdote that somebody had shared about, I think, their first trip to the US, and
Yeah.
he lost the ticket or something, and Anand was very
No,
calm and
so they lost
composed.
their, yeah, Anand, when he was traveling, our storyteller was traveling for the first time. And interesting, this was not a scripted thing. We didn't know this
Right.
was going to happen. And he spoke about losing their baggage. And they
Baggage,
had to
yes.
meet these clients and completely flustered. And
Yeah,
go
yeah.
back to the story.
Yeah, and Anand was very calm and composed. And I think that was the point at which he developed that feeling about, okay, Anand leading the company is great for the company and for me. So this whole mythology around companies and how you build that authenticity for leaders. Now, some of these things will be passed on as folklore. This kind of a story is great at the time, right? Maybe that person would have shared it with a few people that he or she knew, but that's where it would have ended. But if you think of the power of the story, the kind of things that it is conveying, that is what is the culture of the company and how great the leaders are and how these people are actually walking the talk, right? The leaders. And that is something which we know gets missed out, right?
Correct.
Because you're not creating that repository of these stories. And I think that is something, like you said, what we took out from that event was this whole storyfying of the company's culture. And stories, as we know, are the best way of spreading an idea. Yeah, if I, as an outsider, still remember that anecdote, imagine the kind of stories that are still out there, ready to be tapped. Yeah, coming back to the other thing that you thought was not really going was in tune with our thinking about future relevance. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, sometimes we did do some tactical sorts of things. A lot of the content development work that we did comes to mind. You know, when people come to you and you are looking to grow, you take up a lot of different work. And because this tendency towards experimentation is something that we have ingrained in at Choose to Think, we usually our default is yes. And we say, let's find out a way to do it. So I remember some of the content projects that we did were very mundane or not really fitting with the overall mission of future relevance. So this happened, but I think we still turned that disadvantage into an advantage. It taught us a little bit about how to manage our time. It taught us how to invest in, say, technology to say we've actually written tools to help us generate content, and that which kind of something that we should do because humans are better off doing more interesting creative sorts of projects. So I think we did sometimes spend time down the wrong kind of rabbit holes because we are really into information and knowledge, and this gives an excuse to write questions about different kinds of topics or explore them. But in retrospect, it didn't really do much for our future relevance. So I think now we have a more nuanced view of saying yes to projects.
It did pay us. We never did any of these things for free. We can always say that we ensured in the journey from X to 10X. I always say the first thing is to keep that X, right? Only then will you go to 10X. So first is to survive the present as well. So all those projects did help us on that front. But yeah, we have to think about, I think, being judicious and being deliberate about knowing what is it that is very transactional and its role in your life is to take care of your present versus what is it that is going to keep providing for and building that future is very important. I think we were pretty clear on that. So we've been talking about future relevance, and I think I also name dropped Future Relevance Manifesto and Charter. So what is this chart and manifesto of future relevance that we talk about?
Yeah, so the Future Relevance Manifesto by Choose to Think is an articulation of our point of view on future relevance. And the first one is what something we've discussed already, which is that fundamentally no one can predict the future. And it's really hard for anyone to take a single stance anymore on what the future will turn out like. So first think in terms of futures, like you said, the plural, which means multiple different scenarios. Some of them very good, some of them not so good, and some of them completely open ended can come from any side of the field. So therefore the first entry in our manifesto is possibilities over predictions. Think of it as a portfolio of bets So you will have some small bets, you will have some big bets. So the first one is about not putting your money behind just one horse, but try and back a horse in a race, maybe more than one horse in a single race, and also think of other animals in other races. Uh, the second one is this whole how thinking about what is going to be valuable, what is going to help you build that capability towards driving that value, and how to build that perception about being valuable. So these three things, those three questions we spoke about earlier, being able to answer them and to keep doing this. Because again, the world is shifting. You don't, the answer to these questions is also going to be shifting. The third entry in this is once you've discovered all of this, is to start, leveling up, but to do it very systematically. So we have a phrase or a concept called future stack, where we say that bunch of skills, mindsets, traits that you will need to be relevant. You constantly work towards that and you think of what all you need to add to that future stack, and some things you need to maybe drop from your future stack as well. And along with things like knowledge and practice, I think we are very keen on reflection. So reflection being a big part of this, because that's going to keep telling you whether you're progressing or not. And one trap that we all often tell people is that, yeah, you've done all these exercises, you've come up with, you came up with a manifesto like this, and then the present kind of intervenes, right? So your future relevance is a problem of it's important but not urgent. And so we often tell people that's what you need to beware about. So it has to be as much about the systematic side as it is about the upleveling side. So far we've talked about possibilities over prediction, becoming valuable and learning what is going to be valuable, then actually systematically upleveling. So there are the remaining three. The fourth item on this list is uh, creating that deliberate system and culture, which will allow these things to happen even if you are not consciously paying attention. It is allowing the system one of the team or of the individuals to just go with the flow and get it done. So this is where defining your values, defining what are the practices, using the stories to convey those practices in real life. All those things really come. So we've really discovered the power of culture, especially in the last years. The next one is what we call as compounding or compounding habits. So we all know the power of compounding in the world of investing. In fact, what you said earlier about these trivial things, capturing a story happens and you lose your baggage, how you respond to it becomes a little bit of a interesting note in your mind. But the trivial done regularly, done systematically, done repeatedly can have this outsized view. So I tell you the story, you tell that story to five other people. It just can compound from there onwards. And so you really don't know the fact that people build this entire perception about an organization based on just maybe one story told 100 times to 1,000 different people. So there is a huge compounding effect, not just in finances, but in the world of knowledge, but in the world of social networks. And so compounding habits is something that we are really, we had to be part of our future relevance manifesto. And the last thing is that for compounding to really work, for your culture really to pay dividends, this is going to be a long game. Paradoxically, we individuals have longer career spans, but teams seem to have, and organizations seem to be there for fewer and fewer times on these Fortune 500 lists and other such lists. So individuals need to take that long game, and organization need to invest in individuals and give them that long game. And so together, this forms our future relevance manifesto.
Just trying to sum it up here, Ramanand. The first one is possibilities over predictions. Second one is becoming valuable. Third is systematic upleveling. Fourth is being deliberate about your culture. Fifth is compounding, and sixth is being ready to play the long game. Right?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So now that we've listed these points from our future relevance manifesto, how does choose to think work on its future relevance, right? What are the things that we do which is in sync with this, has come out as a result of our thinking around these aspects of future relevance?
So let's start with possibilities over predictions. I think we're all aware that the way everyone is going to work and live in the forthcoming few years, is it's going to be very digital, it's going to be very networked, it's going to be very diverse. You may be working with a wide variety of people across ages, backgrounds. Sometimes you may not even know their true diversity because they're just a handle for you. And so being able to work in an environment like this uh, is something that we've recognized. In fact, before this, we didn't talk so much about the fact that we went remote or we were distributed right from day one. And for us, in fact, it didn't even sound like such a big thing because it was just a point of view that had organically developed for us over a period of time. And it felt like that's how the future was going to be like. So today, everyone talks about hybrid work. And I think for us, it was like a no brainer. I think it came a long back. There are different possible ways in which you could practice remote work, and we've done our share of working. We have actually all been entirely remote. We've worked from different cities and continents on occasion. We've gotten together under the same roof to do few pomodoros together. So we've taken these different scenarios. What happens if we all need to work together? Can we do it? What happens if we need to meet in a conference room and have that all hands equivalent for choose to think? So we've always never put ourselves in a box. One, so these kinds of things have been part of our possibilities over prediction. We never said that the world is going to be remote in few years, therefore we should adopt this. We said, yeah, this is what we want to try out. Let's try these different possibilities. One question I actually wanted to ask you, because you in some sense are the first line of contact for people I choose to think, and you meet a wide variety of people, is that from when you see the ecosystem under which choose to think operates, how do you see this first point or the first many aspects of our manifesto reflecting in the choices we made about how to be part of that ecosystem?
I think this is something that one of our clients, friends, well-wishers, Prashant KS, Prashant also uses a lot. He, I think, uses the term metaverse or basically the ecosystem. So I think base is what he uses. Yes, yes. I think that is something which we should look at when we talk about the word ecosystem. It is not just about you as a company. You're always going to be limited by what you can achieve as a company. So we have always tried to take advantage of anyone and everyone out there in that hyperspace and look at what is the disproportionate amount of value that we can generate, right? So there have been these, just as taking the example of this decision to go remote, right? Always be remote. If you look at that, how would a traditional organization seen that decision, right? That I ideally need to have an office space. If not, I need to go and take a co-working space for some people and let people go hybrid, which is what most people are thinking of doing right now. But we actually looked at all possible partners in our ecosystem, from pubs to cafes, which a lot of startups also do. But we also looked at a startup then, I think, which doesn't exist anymore, but which used to allow us to rent office spaces, right? So you look at all of these things. So don't restrict yourself to the capability that you as an organization, as a closed unit possesses, but look at the whole ecosystem and assume that as your capability. Just thinking like that suddenly changes your horizon, suddenly changes the expanse to which you want to look at. And I think that is something which we've been very good at and been very shameless about as well, right? That yeah, these are all things that are there to be exploited, there to be taken. So I think that is something which we have tried to do. And I think going forward, for not just us or companies of our size, everyone needs to start thinking about that, right? Some of these things have been timeless, right? Your auto companies have always tried to develop their vendor, tried to think about their wealth, build. There's this concept of building those vendors, because when they succeed, that's when the larger organization also succeeds. It's the same thing for everyone. Think of all your partners, potential, who are not working with you right now, but how can you leverage this power and not just restrict yourself? Don't try to slice it away and say that, yeah, that person, that company, not part of what we are doing. And this is something which we've used in some of our work, where we have worked with a lot of freelancers. If you think of freelancers as companies of one, the traditional way of thinking about this is that, yeah, if I want content to be created, if I want events to be hosted, I need to have these content creators. I need to have these hosts on my roles. But then it just imagine the on the ground situation, right? You've hired someone. That person doesn't have enough work for the entire duration of the day. They may just get frustrated, right? That what am I doing here? And you just try to create work for them, which is not ideally the kind of work they want to do or what will create value for the company. But you want to keep that person occupied because you're hiring them, and you think you now own 8 hours of that person. These are the kind of things where, working with freelancers, being open and transparent with them, that this is where we think you can deliver great value. This is something which is of interest to you. We've hired freelancers, we've had a very stringent process with checklists and guidelines just to make sure that they really love what they're wanting to do. And I've heard this from some of the people that have worked with us, that they enjoy working with us a lot more than their so-called day job. Some people have left their day jobs because they got a taste of what they always wanted to do and realized that they can make a career out of it. And some of them are working with us as partners still. But yeah, that's the view that I think we should be taking when we are talking about this whole ecosystem. And again, it's about questioning that traditional thought process, which is where we are saying think of possibilities rather than going with one prediction.
I actually wanted to take off on what you just said, which is this experimentation of physical spaces and different models of working. We've also done that on the in the digital realm because that is increasingly becoming everyone's second home. Whether it is how a space to do just engagement in, a space to just do learning in, all these different community apps. I think we go in, we dabble with them, we try it internally. So there is that desire to explore these possibilities as soon as they come up. And so you will see a lot of early adopters among choose to think employees in their own respective ways. The other thing is that even I realized as we speak that words like employees, words like career is really not something that we should even be using. Maybe we've often spoke about this film crew model where people come together for a project or and they disband sometimes. What it means is that yes, when a project ends, you are now looking at, or you're actually pitching a project even to your freelancer, your so-called employee. You never can really take them for granted and say, this is I have a relationship where you will expect work from me, I will dump work on you. And that's how it goes. But I often almost see it as I need to persuade this person to be get interested in this project. I have to pitch it to them, and the power balance may still be in my favor, but I cannot see them and treat them as. And similarly, like you said, they're working with us. A lot of people have definitely told us they like our process of interviewing because it's very something that you do a lot of interesting things in it. But maybe instead of career, we should even substitute that they don't see that they will build a career with us. They know that their future relevance is a lot more secure with us, or that's the direction in which they would like to move it, and they're using us again in the same way that we are using them. And I'm using the word using in a very non-judgmental sort of way. We're really leveraging the power of the ecosystem that we worked in, and because we are going to live in this networked and diverse world, all these things are the skills that we need to do. So we need to encourage people to go check out new things, ask for help, offer help to others. And all of this was not incentivized earlier. But if you don't do this now, you're going to be irrelevant. That's,
Right.
I think, our point of view on
Yeah.
it.
I'll also ask you about any specific deliberate thing that we do at Choose to Think, which is aimed at making sure we are thinking about possibilities over predictions. Is there something that we do?
Yeah. So two things. One is that if you see one from a business point of view, we often take up wide variety of projects that teach us a lot of things. And then we invest, we put our muscle behind one of them. So just to give you an example, we've often done interesting projects. For instance, like, can you help us reframe our onboarding process? Now we are not experts necessarily in onboarding, but we're experts in thinking afresh. And that's what we did for this company. And this actually came around the time that they were starting to offer remote jobs. And I think from what I hear, that experiment really kickstarted a new way of doing onboarding. So we do spread our activities over multiple areas. We That can be a strength and a weakness, like we discussed earlier in this episode. But internally, once we realize that we need to keep discussing these scenarios, we need to discuss what if we didn't have power, because we're so entirely dependent on our electricity and our second home, the internet. So this scenario is something we shouldn't take for granted. And so over time, we said that we need to have a systematic way to keep learning and keep putting ourselves in these different future scenarios, however trivial they may seem. And so we started something called as the future ring, the weekly future ring, wherein we ask one question to each other. We take turns in answering them. There are often these scenarios. I think our current question is about one practice at work that we think will become obsolete very soon. And you answered something like like identification. I think coming in the organization and having to show your identity, that is probably going to be very different now, because you may not have a physical office to prove your access to things. In fact, we have been running some scenario sessions for companies around hybrid work, and someone said maybe you need to add their vaccination status to whether
Right.
they can enter an office. So these are all scenarios that come from the realm of imagination. It is not so much about getting the answer right. It's really about keeping that muscle of, if you are in this position, what will you do?
Yeah, it's. I think it's being ready to face these kind of scenarios and not be surprised or not be shocked, not get caught like a deer in headlights kind of a thing. You don't get frozen because you suddenly put off by the situation, because every day, every week when things are normal, you are imagining these kind of scenarios, and so nothing basically surprises you. I think is the message that we take there. Going to the next point in our manifesto, staying valuable and upleveling. Again, anything specific that you can talk about, which we are
Yeah.
doing at Choose to Think.
He realized that this is important but not urgent, right? Even for us, even though we may profess about future relevance, we are humans. And so there is always something pressing, there are other priorities, there is procrastination, all these things. So we developed this point of view that we should at least spend 15 minutes each day on future relevance in some form of the or the other. And often to do that, you offer a bouquet of, say, double that amount of things to do that can keep you future relevant. We started, for example, the reading compound about 3 years. I think we are close to hitting 1400 days of reading one book summary every day. And most people, and a lot of people we know don't like book summaries because, especially if they're readers, they find it too small, so you can't do justice to a book in a short summary. But I think I've realized that we use it very differently. We use it
Right.
almost as a source of randomness. Because if I want to have a conversation with you about hybrid work today, tomorrow I might be having a conversation with someone else who's just picking my brains on, say, the onboarding question. How can I reimagine the whole world of onboarding? And he comes to me because I'm not an expert. If an expert would probably be so far deep down that rabbit hole that they would just give the same way. They would say, you need to have this party pack with your bottle and with your logo on it and a bunch of chocolates for the family. But this is really about transcending that. And my taste should come from a book that I heard on design thinking. Your taste should come from a gift that someone in a automobile company gave to their suppliers, right? And that's what we put together. We've said that let's read one book summary every day. Sometimes we don't really like the book summary, but invariably we learn one new thing every day. And it's trivial, but it adds up, it compounds over a period of time. So reading compound is a small way to be future relevant every day. We spoke about smartcasts. Smartcast is, I think, it's a hugely underrated way of learning what is going to be valuable. Because one, you're talking to people who are ahead of you in the curve, which is perfectly fine. All of us cannot be early adopters ahead of the curve in everything. You will see, choose to think, people ahead of the curve on something and laggards in others. I take myself for an example. I'm not a great technology device adopter. I'm usually way behind the curve, but I have the next best thing, which is access to people like you who might go and investigate a new device. Or we spoke recently to Max Haining, who is teaching the world how to do 100 days of no code. because it looks like no code is going to be a big part of development. It's going to turn everyone into a developer. And just the fact that we could approach him, he said, yes, we had a great conversation. We are so much better informed about no code. Is that it's a learning channel for us more than anything else. And then we also have more deliberate ways, like we have a weekly future fitness session, talk about books that we read. We invite guests to come and tell us about things like reinforcement learning from the world of machine learning. And so this constant keeping aside that time, filling it with what potentially could be a source of value in the future. And then we do a lot of interesting experiments from time to time. So I think these are several examples of what we do without overwhelming our day to day.
I think, and what's been interesting about the future fitness session is there have been practices like sharing learning in companies for a long time, right? And usually it starts off very nicely and then it tapers off. And then that session is also, that slot is used for other things. I think a couple of things that we've done differently is A, we've tried to protect that slot as much as possible, right? And B, we have kept it open, right? It's not just about we sharing something that we've learned, but yes, we know that that's an opportunity, that's a platform where we can share stuff that we are reading about, courses that we are doing. So it almost becomes an output that you can aim for, that if I'm reading something, I know, yeah, next month I can take a slot in the future fitness session, and I know that preparing a presentation will help me reinforce my learning as well. And then we've got people to come in, we have tried out different platforms, we've tried some of these apps, and we found out that yeah, together we can actually use this well. So we've adopted it into our way of
Yeah.
work as well.
And in some sense, look at what it has turned you into, right? You are the de facto tech implementer, though I come from a technology background. So you often take the lead in, say, developing or exploring an app because you've learned a little bit about no code and you can actually do it. And so I think you spoke very validly about things we've done to protect it. So I really do feel that for anyone who is trying to learn as a busy knowledge worker, they really need to have that slot and protect it like a lioness protects its cubs. So the future fitness session is something that we try and do that. I think we have a 95% uptime rate on future fitness sessions. Then you have to have that place where you're encouraged to share your takeaways. You engage with the material that you're learning. So whether it is you doing a no code exploration, whether it is someone taking a course, we have had colleagues who come and talk about uh, writing related things that they have courses that they have taken, and they come and tell us about it. And that act of generating that takeaway just helps you engage with that content so much more. And then also, because we spoke about that showcasing aspect, which is so important for that value creation, some of these also generate that initial draft of a
Artifact.
video yeah, we boringly call artifact, but it is like a prototype of a smartcast. It is a prototype of a presentation, a thought leadership piece we want to talk about. And suddenly you realize that you have this. It's one of the biggest challenges anyone has when working on their social capital is, what do I really say, or how do I say it in a very polished manner? And we know that getting to that polished manner requires you to go through that poor draft, right? That ugly draft, that is that pencil sketch you spoke about earlier. And so without knowing, after that 1 hour you have this ugly artifact waiting to become that swan that you can show to the world. It has these multiple effects. I think just in the same way there's a smart cast can be have multiple effects. They help us make sense of the world with each other, and they also have this great outcome that you can share with the world.
Yeah, yeah. And what about being deliberate about the culture, right?
Right.
You want to
So
talk
I
about that?
think we've had culture, but we've not been that deliberate about it. And let me explain how. So today, when we think about what are the components of a deliberate culture, one is that you need to have clearly identified or articulated your culture. Like our colleague Sirisha likes to say, culture is there whether you like it or not. Usually, it is unsaid, it is practiced but not recognized. So why not articulate it? Why not define it? Why not capture it? And we know that it's important to capture these things down. It's important to collect those stories and not leave them for your 25th anniversary dinner. And I think we've developed a culture over a period of time which is about things like curiosity, things about sharing, things about experimentation, things about compounding. And what we've started doing now, we are in fact in the middle of that exercise of deepening our cultural manifesto, as we call it. So the culture manifesto has things like what is your vision, what are your values. We already had one sort of a draft version of it, but we're doing one more rigorous exercise around it to create that very deliberate aspect of defining the culture. We've been guilty of not capturing our own stories as well. So hopefully viewers, listeners listening to this, you will see this very soon. So we're putting together, collecting our stories as well. But the fostering of culture through the kinds of things like we spoke about, through the reading compound, future fitness sessions, all that has been channels through which we have fostered internal culture and reinforced that kind of culture. I think we are in the process of deliberately further deliberating and creating that deliberate culture. Because we are a small team, we have sometimes it's been easy for us to just do it between people. But I think now we are taking a more deliberate approach around it.
Right. So, Raman, let's move to the last section of this smartcast where we'll come to some tactical advice around future relevance and stuff that people have asked us. A couple of questions came in through LinkedIn and other channels as well. So, I will bring up those questions and let's take turns to answer. I'll add to whatever you are saying as well. So, one of the first questions that came up was, how do you pick up the next book and decide to listen to the next podcast?
Okay, this is go back to our possibilities over predictions. If you another variation of that is you don't need to be doing one thing at a time. You can be doing multiple things in parallel. So the question actually is how do you just surround yourselves with books and start keep picking them up, keep sampling them from different times. The mistake a lot of people do is that they say, okay, I have to pick one book, and that becomes a very important decision in their life at that
Right.
point. Like the bookcase behind you, if you have an open bookcase with a glass window on it, then you can pick from different shelves at different points and you can stop them. So first is to reduce the size of that judgment. I think this is where that compounding approach or seemingly make it a smaller decision than it needs to be. I so in my case, speaking for myself, there are two three things that will always come. One is that I've taught myself not to worry about the cost of a book. If I'm interested, even if it is a weak interest, and if it really truly is affordable, most of books are affordable if you're a working professional these days, is to just add it to your pile. And I'm not even using the word queue, I'm saying add it to your pile. Its day will come someday, but that decision of having added it to your pile will make that future day more likely to come. So I will pick it up from listening to recommendations of people. There is really no secret to the secret, if there is at all, is an open secret. It is about doing it. So I will get recommendations from fellow choose to think people. We record a monthly insight your month where we have to give one recommendation to our viewers. So then it makes us think of what I've read recently or what my colleague has read recently, or we will ask our network and ask them to recommend it to us. There is really no stronger recommendation engine than your network in my case. How
I
about you?
think, yeah, just to make it more concrete and tangible, I think what we end up doing is we always keep our antennae up. Wherever there is a mention of a book or an author or an article, just go check it out, right? A lot of times, what I've seen people is they like postpone it for a later time. They'll say, okay, I'll check it out. And we know human memory is the most fallible thing in the world. So you are going to forget about it. So one thing is go check it out, make notes. I think that is one thing which I've done. I use a very way of doing this where if I'm carrying my phone somewhere, I'll actually send an email to myself. Most mails from Harish to Harish are these kind of things, right? Because I want to check out the next day morning when I have the time to actually do this. So I don't miss it. That's one thing. And show notes of pod articles, references. And one thing that I've been doing, which may put some of our smartcast guests, make them feel uneasy, is a lot of people have bookcases like these. When I'm asking questions and they're in full flow, I'm just trying to look at what are the books that they have in their bookcases, right? Because again, that's a great way to look at it. What I use this for as a reference point, how I started this, is one tip that you had given me back when we used to go to British Library, right? The first place that you would look at for books were books that were being returned. So they
Right.
had a space where all the people returning books, they would be kept for some time before the person would actually go back and place them in the shelf. Because those books are the ones which are being read. There's something good about those books, which is why they've been rented and they're being read. So the chances of you finding a good book is higher there in that slot. So similarly, look at the bookshelves of people. So yeah, next time
Yeah.
any guest comes, make sure that I can read those books
I,
by.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. I realized that I was giving a more systemic answer. One is that it's like the equivalent of bookmarking, right? So I will use my Amazon wish list to just add. So it is that even more lower cost commitment, right? You
Correct.
don't even have to purchase the book. All you're telling yourself is that I think I'm interested in this book. Currently, I think that. So um, I do use my Amazon wish list. That's my default destination because practically every book can be found on Amazon. And if it's not on Amazon, I'm going to struggle to get it anyway. So, use your wish list, use some kind of a bookmarking service. It could be that. It could also be if you see a book at someone else's place, take a photograph of it, create a channel for yourself, which is like a group on WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, whatever it is, where you're the only member and you can keep sending yourself notes just like you send emails to yourself.
Another thing, a useful thing is to take, if you're on Kindle, get samples.
Absolutely.
It's a next step to adding to your wish list, right? So yeah, next question. Most people read books or listen to podcasts, but they're not efficiently able to implement the things that they learn. What is your process for reading or listening to podcasts, and a few tips that you can share with others? So
Okay. Yeah. So again, first I want to start with a sort of a reassuring, aspect to this. One is that if you are seeing this, viewing this, you are a human. Your brain is designed to forget unless information is considered very important to your brain, and most times we will forget. So you are not alone if you think you cannot retain information. But science also tells us that you have to take additional steps if you want to retain information. So that is where you need to focus on, and then the implementation can follow. So what I've started doing once I recognize this and I analyzed when I remember and when I don't remember, is that I do take notes as much as possible. I've started scribbling in paper books, which I not would not do earlier. I take Kindle highlights very liberally. I don't try and think whether this is really a highlight or not. It sounds interesting. I can discover a use for this. I can post it on social media. I want to refer to it. I just go ahead and highlight. Sometimes when I use an application like on my phone, the Kindle app and not the Kindle itself, I will use different colors to mark different sorts of outcomes. So I think just go ahead and liberally take notes, capture it in the moment, and then uh, the next stage is of the retention system. So like we said, go to a future fitness like session. If you want to come and use a future fitness session to talk about something you are exploring, that's your output channel. Get in touch with us. So all these different output channels like Insight Your Month, our daily, I read, I post a takeaway, they all become reasons to engage with the content, post that retention. And then we've also had this approach. It's almost like Readwise, that tool, right? Which you can use that to resurface information back to you. We have something similar internally that we do on our internal reading compound. So that's the next trigger. And just create that retention because you're not going to retain everything at first glance. What do you do, Harish?
yeah, I think that's the most important thing I would say in solving this problem, right? First is acknowledging that you're going to forget about it, right? That memory decay is going to happen. You are not going to remember something forever. So then what do you do about it? Being very deliberate about these outputs, right? Having some destination where you can talk about it, post about it, helps a lot. And if I would say all the things that I've read and listened to or watched, where I did not have an output of it, have more or less disappeared from my memory. There may be some knowledge that I would have gained out of it, which will build, compound unconsciously. But if you ask me what is it that was there in that book, I'll struggle to tell you.
Uh,
But the ones where I have done something, yes, I will remember that.
I just wanted to add a little bit of nuance, just building on what you said, which is that we also don't want to give you the impression that most reading is therefore useless or most consumption of information is useless. There are other psychological effects. Once you encounter something, you will start paying more attention
Right.
selectively to it frequently, so that your environment will provide those kinds of triggers. So do consume, and I think Tyler Cowen, the economist and podcaster, has said this, that to read a book, actually I need to spend 57 years of my life, that's the time it take to read the book, because what he's saying is that all the accumulated wisdom you have so far will actually help you read faster, better, smarter the next time. So it's like compounding all over again. You start very slow, you trudge very slowly, but then you suddenly find out that your speed of consumption, your speed of accumulation, all does improve. The final thing I think I will mention here is that try a spaced repetition tool. I use Anki. I've started experimenting with it. I'm still a novice on it. But there are some people I'll mention. There's a person called Michael Nielsen who's spoken about how he has used Anki to learn or consume scientific papers. I think he's a physicist. And so he needs to remember and revisit a lot of papers. So he's even turned that into a spaced repetition form. So I think recognize the fact that you will forget. Also recognize there are conditions under which you will remember, and try to use tools to maximize that.
Right. Yeah. And one other thing that I would like to add here, a lot of people have been talking about it lately, is not having this guilt of leaving books halfway through or whatever. I think that sounds counterintuitive, right? That you're saying that you should read more and you can also leave books halfway through. I think just being open to it makes you free. Suddenly, when you know that you have that choice, and I think this is where that whole idea also comes in, where you are using what you have learned earlier, what is being talked about in that chapter. Sometimes, and it's not like that chapter, there's no use of that chapter. Somebody who's encountering that topic for the first time needs that building block. But you don't go and start reading the alphabet today, right? You assume that you know the alphabet and you actually start reading the words. But for a child, they have to start from the alphabet and then they proceed to words and sentences. So if you are at a higher level, go ahead, make use of that advantage you have of being ahead in the curve, right? So I think that is again very important, both with podcasts and books. So be more liberal, be ready to sample more things and leave things if they're not working. Next question that has come in is, how do you explore content and people on social media? So I'll go first here.
Yeah, I think I wanted you to go first because you've been doing a better job of it than me. So go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing that I've learned recently is using a lot of these lists and keyword searches, right, on platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, where these hashtags, again, whenever somebody uses hashtags, I have a look at it at least. I have certain lists on my TweetDeck interface for people who talk about some aspect of HR, remote work, and things like that. I have a separate list for cricket, which is the one thing that I don't like to mix with work, and that's my guilty pleasure. But yeah, that has to be there, right? So using these lists and keywords, I think, is very important. The minute you get some of these keywords, try to also look at other keywords that are being used in that tweet or in that post, because they will help in discoverability. One thing is to look at people who have written an article, who are featured on a podcast. So go follow them if they're talking about stuff that is of interest. That's like the direct way of doing it. The other thing that I immediately do is look at people that they are following, right? And you may not want to look at the entire list, but quickly look at, say, 50, 100 people, see if you can sample a few, look at them. Just do that because it will add variety to your sources of content that you are consuming. You need to keep adding that, because otherwise you're going to get the echo chamber is just waiting to happen. In some cases, I deliberately go seek out people that I absolutely don't like, or their views don't match mine. I seek them out. There are some publications that I have a paid subscription to, simply because I want to keep that. I want to tell myself that yes, I've paid for this publication, so I need to go check out what they're publishing, because I want to build that faceted view. And it's not that I may dislike the general trend or slant of that publication or that site, but there are a lot of things for which it is the jury is out, right? You don't know whether it's a fact or an opinion. So the more opinions you know collect, the better your worldview is going to be, right? So that's one thing. And the other one is to subscribe to as many newsletters as possible. And this is where I think I've done something which is very interesting, and I feel very happy about this hack that I came up with. I subscribe to a bunch of newsletters. A lot of them give very good recommendations. I find out about new people to follow and sites and all of that. But like with anything, it was glut of content, right? My CTQ mailbox was full, then my Gmail inbox was full. And then suddenly one idea struck me. So I created a new Gmail ID, free one, and now I use that for all my Substack subscriptions and all my paid subscriptions. All of that goes into that one inbox. So nothing else goes in. It is content that I know I'm interested in reading, right? So now I don't have the guilt during the week or on or any given day that this newsletter has come in and I have not read it. But when I have time, I know that I just need to go into that inbox, and when I go there, that's the dedicated time and space to consume all this great content that I know is out there and going to make my world a better one.
Correct. So I think it is again back to that system approach. One thing I think we all had to unlearn was going from a world where knowledge was scarce to where knowledge is now abundant, and there is the hose pipe only becomes bigger and bigger each day. And I remember being in a mode where whoever I follow on Twitter, I really want to read as many of their tweets that they have posted in the last 24 hours, and they're thus not really adding more people to my feeds and trying all sorts of ways. So now I think it's the other. You have to really think in an abundance first mode where it's going to be sampling, it's going to be taking bets on sources and not really worrying too much about getting that decision. You can always unfollow people, as Naveen Kabra, one of our Smartcast guests, has told us. You can always, so you should be quick to follow people and you should be equally to quick to unfollow them if needed. Similarly, I think with the newsletter subscriptions, I've taken a leaf from your book and set up that separate account. Two things I'll talk about. One more thing is that I wish Twitter had better lists management, because it really is a game changer according to me. So a very simple way to do it: if you identify 5 topics in your what we call the curiosity diet. In my case, I want to know things about learning. I want to know things about the future of work. I'll create lists for them. And so then you can actually, instead of going to Twitter, you are going to your future of work list. And
Right.
that I think is a huge game changer for a lot of people. One thing I've done deliberately, which seems old fashioned, is to actually increase my newspaper count. I've actually subscribed to one more newspaper these days, because the conventional wisdom these days is that don't subscribe to news, because news keeps you unhappy. There's always this front page sadness, and it's always going stale and all that. I, in fact, found it the other way, because news now breaks like every second. The newspaper is actually the resource of slow news now. So by the time I see my news the next day, a lot of it has gone stale already, which actually makes it easier to jump to those few things which are genuinely interesting, or they are more analytical, opinion oriented pieces. So I think that newspapers still do a very good job. They also have the advantage of not distracting you by having pop-up ads and clicks and new tabs to open. I cannot, as much as I try, open a new tab to explore one new thing. I'm just stuck with a piece of paper. And so I find it a lot easier. It helps with my digital consumption and so on. So paradoxically, I've actually added a newspaper, and I find that is a really good source of content. It still is true. And I must confess that Ashish Chandorkar, someone that we interviewed as for one of the Smartcasts, he had indicated he talked about his newspaper reading. Again, I took a leaf from his book. to do, or his newspaper to do that.
I've also done the same. In fact, that has also given me some other subscriptions which I've been happy
Yeah,
about.
and they actually do feature people on social media. So if you're looking for people to follow on social media, your newspaper can actually help recommend a few names as well.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's move to the next question. How do we identify problems at CTQ, and some tips on how others can do the same at their companies or organizations?
So I think we spoke about the importance of reflection earlier. Reflection is great. Everyone should do it. You've been always told try and journal every day, or try and do a retrospective. So people do these, but it's also about the frequency and the deliberateness with which you do some of these things. For reflection, you don't need to go into an offsite, into a fancy hotel and get people together. Can you really make reflection a compounding habit? I think that is the problem. It's a meta way to identify problems. So I think we've been very deliberate about reflection. We do that as part of small deep after events, after activities that we do. But we were discussing yesterday that we're still not happy with it. We still want to take it further. So I think really setting aside time for reflection is a huge starting point, and uh, we would recommend everyone here to do it. It's hard to add a new habit, a new routine, a new ritual for your team and for yourselves, but it is really worth that effort. I will also add that there are techniques like, say, pre-mortems, that can help you do proactive reflection, if I can call it that. So practices like that, really learning from the mistakes of other people and not going there, is how you can identify problems. And the third thing I would say is that we do try and capture everything in our internal source of knowledge called Asana. So if there is something we want to act on, a problem, it is like that bookmark that we said for books. It's there are different places for different things. So even problems, best to put it down somewhere, best to put it in an Asana task, best to send an email to yourself. So just capturing that problem when you encountering, having that antennae open. So I think we're just repeating ourselves now. It is that antennae, it is that capture, and then it is that system to go back to it.
I think you mentioned Asana and reflection about events and debriefs. I think one thing to reiterate there is the fact that we have reflected on everything. So it's like a matter of process, right? You go and deliver a session. It could be a workshop. The end of the workshop, because Asana is the virtual home of all things CTQ, that's where you don't just go and close a task. You say that this is what happened at in the workshop. Anyone else wants to add something is who has also attended that, or through the course of that task or that mini project or project, leaves their comments there. So now next time when you encounter such a situation, you will go and check there, right? And that is there. I think the biggest challenge is people not capturing it there. So just thinking of that, the life of that task or that event does not end when the event has been delivered or that project has been delivered, but it just add that extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes and assume the closure on Asana as the actual closure of that project. I think being very deliberate about that has ensured that we capture all these, and that's where I think we've identified these problems for ourselves and what are the things that we want to work on.
I would also say that people these days talk about learning to learn, but they don't think of these small, trivial activities as learning to learn. Any activity, even a smart cast like this, there will be something that we learned. And if we can enable that space and that method to just put it down somewhere, the choice of going back to it and looking at it and learning from it and refreshing your memory is a separate one, but that can only be enabled if you get the first step right. So I think when you are encountering problems, you want to capture it, and when you hear other people, fortunately again we speak to a lot of very diverse people, and they tell us about problems that they are facing, and that in many cases is a problem that we are likely to face someday in the future. Just that reflection, that documentation process is a great starting point.
Yeah, and I think one more thing that we've been trying to do is writing down those decision journals, right? When we talk about working with some agency or hiring someone, we say that these are the reasons why we are going ahead with this. These are the conditions that we expect. So next time, so if when the outcome of that decision comes to the fore, you can actually then evaluate that, okay, this is what you expected and this is what has happened. So just being more objective about these kind of things helps, and that's how you will become a better decision maker as well. So I think that is also something which we started doing. We have a folder on our Google Drive called decision journals now. All right, last question, and this one is from one of our well-wishers and friends of CTQ, Ashwin Bhandarkar. He says, can you talk about a conscious practice of knowledge management? Any tools and methods you use? We've covered some of these things over the last few questions, but if you want to address this question specifically.
Yeah. So I'll talk about two things. One is just to recap some of the concepts and the tools that are very useful. And the second is to give some specific. If you look at my phone or my devices, what will you see installed on it that enables something like this? Some of the concepts. Spaced repetition is a tool that is, or a concept that is really very handy. Recognizing that certain types of knowledge, they need to have that emotional connect with what you already know, and so some of that is going to stick better if it is a story, or if it is, I can find a connection to it that I am interested in. So for example, if I find a sporting connection to it, or I find a computer science connection to a concept, I'm probably more likely to add it to my set of knowledge. So that's something I try and do very deliberately. I also take occasional courses. I'm again not very hesitant in trying out courses. Just to give you an example, this year I completed a set of courses on futures thinking. So this involves activities like scenario planning and so on. But I'm also taking a course on appreciating Carnatic music, because there are multiple things you can learn. One is the actual subject matter, which I have a passing interest in, but also how that teacher teaches. What is the system that they use to deliver these courses? Everyone has their own different approach to it. So if you look at the kinds of apps that I use to enable my conscious knowledge management, there is Asana that I take notes in. For links, because I do a lot of curation at work, I use a combination of Pocket, which is a great app for capturing links. I also have an extension on my Chrome browser. It's called One Tab. And so you open tabs and it just suddenly adds up, right? And God forbid there crashes and takes everything with it. So I use One Tab. It just creates a single tab with a list of links in place. It's a very one-click action, so very simple to use. I use Notion for monthly reflection. I have a list of things that I want to reflect about, and that a lot of these pieces of what I learned that month can all come in there. I also use an old-fashioned diary for a journaling habit that I'm now proud to say I've been able to hold up for 4 months straight. So that again, I capture small things like what did I learn today, or what is on my mind that I want to get off my mind. So things like that. An old-fashioned notebook is also good. Kindle highlights. Kindle is a big part of my book reading. So Kindle highlights, and the Kindle app has a lot of features like you can export that and so on. I also wanted to mention Duolingo. I do a little bit of, I do 15 minutes of learning French and Spanish. And so Duolingo is my place for learning language. There is Blinkist, our book summary app. The other thing I've done, therefore, now you're wondering all these different apps, right? To just put them together. They're all physically co-located on the icons are together on the phone screen. And finally, I think getting familiar with online learning platforms, whether it is Coursera, whether it is edX, whether it is 42 Courses, another very quirky platform. Everybody offers things in a different way. Get familiar with them, browse them, go through them, and suddenly you will then discover the courses that can help you stay future relevant. Or what
Right.
about you, Harish?
Yeah, yeah. So some of the things are very similar. By the way, I've also done one, I think, Harvard course on Hill.
Okay.
It's Handle,
Raj
yeah,
handle, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was interesting. Again, it was just about going and exploring something which was not part of my regular learning universe, right? Otherwise, the tools are very standard in the sense that things that we've spoken about. The journaling has been something which I've been doing for, I think, the last 2 3 years now. been fairly regular about it. I summarize my day, things that I did, things I felt happy about, things, ways in which I could have had a better day. All these things help. It brings a closure to my day because I usually do it just before sleeping. Using Asana for choose to think related work and also personal reminders, right? Things that I want to go and explore. The separate inbox that we spoke about for subscriptions. And some things that I've done, like these experiments, I created this personal CRM tool using Airtable. Tried to hit two birds with one stone, not really kill, but do experimentation with a new no-code tool like Airtable, and also create something. It is a project for my own use, right? Which is where I try to tag people with different topics that they will be interested in. Since it's a question for Ashwin, Ashwin's tags are like music and cryptic crosswords in my Airtable database, right? So these are the kind of things that help in just putting that whole thing together, all the personal knowledge that we are talking about, whether it's people, ideas, concepts, stuff that we know about people. I also use Notion for both making a keeping track of people that I want to interview for CTQ Smartcast. I have a separate podcast as well where I interview my friends from my B school just to get a sense of where they are in their career and what they've learned over the last 2 decades. We actually have a monthly self feedback document that follow at Choose to Think. So I made it a point to make it a weekly reflection. So every Thursday I fill that out, treating these future fitness sessions as destinations where I can talk about whatever I'm learning and reading, ensures that I have that discipline of capturing my notes. I think these are the kind of things that have helped me, very concrete things that somebody can pick up and use
Yeah.
in their own life.
I also, since we have to thank Ashwin for this question, I must also say that people like Ashwin and many of our compound subscribers, they are another reason for us to consciously practice knowledge management. Everyone who's on our multiple compound groups, the Daily Reader, the Future Stack, Social Capital, there is always something that they share with us in the course of them going about their compounding habits. That is a great way for us to also share information with them. So while this might not be a conscious practice, it is that opportunistic practice of knowledge management. So someone like Ashwin says something, I can add something to that conversation, and which I would have got from some recent reading of mine. So for instance, yesterday some of our groups were talking, had read an article about design and what it tells you about designing for people who are not in the mainstream thinking of design. So this could be, for instance, older people. And since all of us are going to be old at some point or other, this is actually something we should care about. And we had such a wonderful set of comments by different subscribers. One of them is actually a designer. He's been a trained designer. And he and someone else mentioned about how if you design for so-called disabled people is actually useful for everyone else. And someone like Rory Sutherland, who's an ad guru and talks about behavioral economics, has also said this, that if you design a ramp, you can actually, it's good for everyone. It doesn't have to be only for old people or wheelchair users. Something like this I can share with my team, and and with my team, with all compound subscribers that we have. And so you are also, Ashwin, a source for us to practice our knowledge management.
Yeah, yeah. And on that note, Raman, we'll bring this to an end. But before that, I won't ask you for future relevance of X as we ask all our guests. But I'm going to ask you for, say, three concrete steps that we can recommend to leaders or uplevelers on what they should do for future relevance.
Yeah. So I think you have said this before, that we need to keep reminding ourselves and everyone that what we did 12 months ago shouldn't be what we are doing at this point in time. So making oneself obsolete is really, or disrupting oneself is the name of the game here. And to that, I think we have three things to offer, which is more timeless in nature. You can implement this, but still stay relevant in the future. So the first thing for leaders of teams or anyone just taking charge of their own future relevance is come up with a manifesto for yourselves. If you're trying to build culture in your teams, come up with a culture manifesto. Tells you what your values are, what your mission is, what your goals are, where are you headed. And there are some interesting techniques and templates to do that. At an individual level, there are a lot of reflection questionnaires that you can do, but essentially it's hard work for a lot of us. But try and put down in writing as to what are the scenarios that are ideal scenarios for you, and then working
Work
backwards, what
backwards.
do you do to get to those scenarios. I think it is not so much about just saying that this is what I want to have, so many, so much money in the bank or whatever. Just really to think of these different scenarios and pick what you want. So that manifesto can really help. And the culture manifesto, we have an entire process around that now, so we know it's hard work, but we know it is worth doing. The second one is for yourselves, to keep yourselves relevant. Pick up a compounding habit. And now a compounding habit could be reading every day, it could be journaling every day, it could be expressing yourselves on social media every day. And there are many other. Some people, for them, engaging with the arts or engaging with a hobby every day could be a compounding habit. So
Experimenting could be one.
experimenting is a compounding habit. When you do compounding habits, you want to do it frequently, you want to do it for a long period of time, and you also want to capture some of these little artifacts and takeaways, and then use that to get better over time. So build one for yourselves, audit your habits, see which of them is a simple habit, which is a compounding habit, and which are habits that you need to get rid of. And the third one is we consume a lot of information these days. We spoke about the culture manifesto. So you know where you're headed. And now you're building these little compounding habits that take you step by step. But we also think you should identify a diet, a new kind of diet. You can call it a culture diet. We can also call it a curiosity diet. Think of those areas that you want to deliberately invest your time in, learning about it, consuming information. This could be with you yourself, it could be with your team. So if you want to foster a certain sense of shared culture in your team, whether the team is co-located or whether it is distributed, really doesn't matter. Use a culture diet where you are, let's say your one of your values is openness, or one of your values is resourcefulness, one of your values is curiosity. Saying that is not good enough. Can you share information how someone is curious? Can you point out a leader that practices curiosity work and share that information? Can you ask your team members to just tell us how they were resourceful in the last 6 months? Create that space for informal conversation, but around some of these topics, which we call a culture diet. It is, you cannot force this down their throat, but you're offering that plate to them.
On that note, Raman, I think we've given these three very concrete recommendations. Make a culture manifesto, start a compounding habit for yourself, ensure a culture diet for your team. I think most leaders and uplevelers will do if they start doing this. So, on that note, thanks a lot for spending this time and sharing what we have been doing, revealing some of our secrets, and in the process, we having fun and recounting some of our history as well. Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Harish.